Alright, today the claim I'll be responding to is nuclear power is the most beneficial source of power to date. My opponent's secondary claims were nuclear power is environmentally friendly, nuclear power is an efficient source of energy, and nuclear power is reliable. Now, while his claims were valid, he failed to take into consideration many issues, and these are my claims. That there's substantial risk involved with nuclear energy. Nuclear power plants are costly compared to other methods of getting energy, and the world has limited resources necessary to fuel nuclear power plants. So for my first support here, I need to start with a bit of a definition. A nuclear and radiation accident is defined by the International Atomic Energy Agency as an event that has led to significant consequences to people, the environment, or the facility. So that brings me to my first claim here, a counterclaim rather, that there are substantial risks involved with nuclear energy. The first major, well, I shouldn't say first major malfunction, the worst malfunction in history was the Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine in April 1986. In this disaster, 31 people died, and now the area is not safe due to all the radiation there, and I do believe it's a 30-kilometer radius, and it could be a little bit more. And the scientists have predicted that it's not going to be safe for another 20,000 years. So essentially, people cannot live anywhere near the site of a nuclear reactor for another 20,000 years, which is just a ridiculous amount of time, and it's a bunch of wasted space. All the wildlife there now is just completely destroyed, and just because of the toxic environment. According to The Guardian, 33 major accidents have occurred since the first one in 1952. That's just under one every 2 years. Just to put that into a little bit of perspective. And according to Science Daily, nuclear meltdowns are predicted to occur every 10 to 20 years. So that's 200 times more often than has been estimated in the past. So if you can imagine that you can't, every 10 years to 20 years, there's an area of the world that can't be inhabited by anything, well, safely inhabited by any people, for 20,000 years. That's a pretty major risk that's involving the environment and all the people that live near this reactor. And this just goes to prove that reactors are far from perfect, and they need more development before they can be a viable method of gaining energy. My second claim is that nuclear plants are costly compared to other energy sources. According to UCSUSA.org, the AP1000 reactors in Florida and Georgia are predicted to cost between $22.5 and $29.3 billion each. And a engineering consulting company by the name of Schlesel Technical, they say that the average cost for a coal power plant is $2 billion, which is 14 times less that of a nuclear reactor, or specifically the AP1000 reactor. According to EIA.gov, the operating cost of a nuclear reactor is $12.41 million annually, whereas those for fossil fuels, the operating costs are $4.55 million. So again, that's roughly a third of what it costs to run a nuclear reactor. And from the same source, maintenance costs of a nuclear reactor are approximately $6 2/3 million, whereas it's $4.6 million for hydroelectric, and that's $2 million less per year. My third claim is that the world has limited resources necessary for nuclear power plants. So greenamerica.org says that the world's supply of uranium is decreasing. And they say that if the world was to switch all of their energy processing to nuclear energy instead of that of coal or other fossil fuels or wind energy or solar energy, it would take less than 10 years to use up all the uranium needed that would produce all that energy, which would just cause the entire world to switch back either to fossil fuels or find new innovations to get energy. The same source says that there's not enough viable space for nuclear reactors. Nuclear reactors need a source of water for cooling, and they can't be near anywhere that can have the potential for natural disasters. So like, they can't be on a fault line, for example, because if there was to be an earthquake, that could potentially cause the reactor to have a meltdown. Or if there's a massive influx of water, such as was in Japan, that could also cause a meltdown. EnergySolutions.com says that there are 700,000 tons of depleted uranium in storage by the U.S. And depleted uranium is just spent uranium that has already been used in a way to gain energy. And that's in storage by the U.S. Department of Energy. And they're running out of places to store this spent depleted uranium. And so the question with that becomes, where will they start putting it once they run out of places to put it that they have now? And the short answer to that is all the nuclear reactors would simply just have to be shut down, and they'd have to revert back to previous forms of energy as previously stated, or find new ways of creating energy. All right, so in conclusion, my opponent's claim that nuclear power is the most beneficial source of power to date is incorrect, because they failed to take into account the risks of nuclear reactors, the cost of nuclear reactors, and the resources necessary to keep nuclear reactors running. Thank you.
I have mine attached, the rough draft with your corrections on it.
Oh, okay. All right, the topic is identified clearly. You tell us what the secondary claims are. Your arguments basically are all counterclaims on this on these arguments, because you never discuss the advocate's reasoning or evidence at all. And in fact, on a couple of the points, you frankly ignore them. There's no discussion of the environmental issue whatsoever, so none of your arguments apply to that one. The argument about efficiency, your second point on it being costly, might apply to the efficiency issue, although I think that the efficiency issue as presented by the advocate had less to do with cost and more to do with reliability. But I could at least see an application there. That doesn't mean that your argument here isn't a counterclaim. It is a counterclaim, but it's mostly a counterclaim that addresses completely different issues. It would be applicable if we were having a policy argument. I'm not exactly sure that it's very applicable for an issue of fact. On the issue of risk, that's like a completely separate argument from what the advocate talked about, except for maybe the case of reliability, which was their third point. I think it's a good counterclaim to whether or not we ought to be doing these particular things, and I think there's a legitimate reason for it to exist. However, I don't know that it denies the advocate's claim, and when we're getting a comparison about what's most beneficial, I think you do have some good arguments here suggesting that other energy resources might be more desirable because of the risk factor. I think that's the way you want to present that particular argument. One thing, though, that never gets considered is what the impact of the other energy resources is. I assume that the advocate talked about why nuclear energy is more environmentally advantageous than the other forms of fossil fuels, and we don't really get any comparison from your position on that issue, except that we know that it's cheaper to use the fossil fuels, but not necessarily that it's environmentally safer. And then on the third point, that there's limited reliability. That one does seem to apply directly to the argument that the advocate was presenting there. There's not a cost issue, but the long-term issue about how much uranium is available. I thought that did apply to your reliability argument pretty clearly. The fault lines, the risk of the spent fuel, I didn't understand why that information was being presented on the third point instead of the first point when you're talking about the various risks that come from nuclear energy, because that seems to be like it fits in with that particular information. All right, thank you.